I think the treaty can be seen as a paradox. It is both a symbol of cooperation, uh, got about after 8 years of intense negotiation, and it was a reminder of an unresolved conflict because the water conflict started soon after 1947. The water sharing conflict was, I think, to my mind, the principal aspect of the two countries' relationship. So it finally got resolved in 1960 with the treaty, and that's what we thought. But having signed the treaty, and that's where the paradox is, signing the treaty did not bring peace with India and Pakistan. Though that was the political objective, that was also the Nehruvian vision, but that did not happen. So the paradox.
You're watching The Gist on Strategies Global. I'm Ramananda Sengupta. Our very, very special guest today is Dr. Uttam Kumar Sinha, who heads the Non-Traditional Security Center at the Manohar Parrikar IDSA and is one of India's leading commentators on transboundary water issues. Today, we're going to be discussing his latest book, Trial by Water, Indus Basin and the India-Pakistan Relations. And anybody who's watching this, I very, very heartily recommend that you pick it up right away. You will not regret it. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Sinha. Always a delight to have you with us.
Yes, it's a pleasure.
So, before I begin, allow me to formally commend your book because it's clearly a labor of love. And honestly, it's among one of the best books I've read so far this year. The amount of research that has gone into it is I would say, quietly kept aside by the style, which is so simple and so clear that even a student or somebody who just wants to understand India-Pakistan relations would want to see. So having said that, let me ask you to take us through what I found some of the most intriguing aspects of the book. That, while our limited time here prevents us from doing a really deep dive, because I would have liked to have taken you chapter by chapter through it, I'd like you to take a few minutes to put the entire Indus Waters treaty into context, as both politically and in that charged post-partition atmosphere, and perhaps with a little bit of Nehru's personal involvement in that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words. I think when you do write a book, you should keep in mind the readers. And, very early on in journalism, I think when I joined the print media, I was told that if you're in the media to write, then you're in the wrong place. You should communicate. And I think that is something that I have kept in mind always, whether I'm writing a paper or a policy report. I think we need to communicate effectively. But having said that, I think the book is titled Trial by Water. It is an engaging title. I think it's a title which is catchy because I think water in the case of India and Pakistan has been both a lifeline and a fault line, simultaneously, right since the partition. Literally, our rivers connect us. While we have, of course, a boundary, but the rivers, the western rivers in Kashmir and the eastern rivers in Punjab, connect life and culture and people and livelihood, and they nourish millions of people in the Indus Basin. And I think yet, metamorphically, water has also been the medium of the two countries' political tests. So that's why it's a lifeline and a fault line. And since partition, it has been a ground on which both trust and mistrust have been tested time and again. The Indus Basin, I think, is not just geography, which of course it is in certain sense. It is a very unique hydrology, but it is also, to me, an intriguing history, an intriguing statecraft, an intriguing diplomacy, and of course the end game. The end game is to get the treaty. And the very fact that the treaty survived almost 65 years, now it is in abeyance, suggests that in some strange ways, despite the wars in 65 and 71 and 1998, Kargil, and numerous cross-border terror attacks from Pakistan, in some strange way, the treaty survives. So it tells a story in itself, you know. So in several ways, when you read the book, I think you understand that the two countries, India and Pakistan, have been on a perpetual trial by water in the last 70 odd
That
years.
comes through very clearly.
Yeah. Sorry?
That comes through very, very clearly in the book.
Yes, and thank you. Yes, the idea is to bring that out forefront. And the book is also the continuation of an earlier book which I did, was called The Indus Basin Uninterrupted. And
I've
it
just
covered a
ordered
lot.
that.
You have, okay. So, you know, history, I mean, when I talk about history, I think I'm not a trained historian, but I do believe that everyone, in whatever discipline one is, one needs to look at history to understand history. um, not to rewrite history. I'm not one of those believers in rewriting history. I think rewriting history connotes a political activity. One should understand the narrative that develops. One should understand the context, the circumstances, the situation in which certain things happen. And the 1950s and the relationship with India and Pakistan, the powers involved, the external powers involved in the whole process. I think these are a good evaluation of the situation of the 50s and how the treaty came about. So that is something that is well focused in the book. There is a layered history, and there is a certain political sort of uh, infringement, if I may use the word, of outside powers like the United States, who are in many ways influencing the whole negotiating process, also influencing the two countries to sign a treaty, which eventually comes about in 1960. So my fine points I would underline, which is in the book for readers to read, is that I think the treaty can be seen as a paradox. It is both a symbol of cooperation, uh, got about after 8 years of intense negotiation, and it was a reminder of an unresolved conflict because the water conflict started soon after 1947. The water sharing conflict was, I think, to my mind, the principal aspect of the two countries' relationship. So it finally got resolved in 1960 with the treaty, and that's what we thought. But having signed the treaty, and that's where the paradox is, signing the treaty did not bring peace with India and Pakistan. Though that was the political objective, that was also the Nehruvian vision, but that did not happen. So the paradox. The second fine point is that there is, of course, a great influence of the larger geopolitics, the Cold War, the rise of the China-Pakistan relationship in the 50s. That's a very striking element, something that we have left unexamined in the 50s. I think the China-Pakistan nexus that we call it today, or the axis, started taking roots in the 1950s. Right? And there's a good chapter on this, how Nehru goes and meets Mao in 1954, and how Mao is misleading Nehru in making him believe that China is a great friend of India and that they are great Asian powers, and together they can, sort of stop the Western imperial influence in the region. And soon after Nehru having met Mao in 1954, um, China grabs hold of Akshay Chin. So that is shaping up very interestingly in the 50s. And then there is also the resilience of the treaty itself, the fact that it survived so many decades, uh, making it a sort of a rare case of continuity in India-Pakistan relations. Because I don't think there's any other continuity, any other issue or aspect that has continued between India and Pakistan relations, except probably for the Indus Waters Treaty. This is the only treaty that has continued to exist. And then finally, in the last phase of the book, you get a sense of the moment of uncertainty with the treaty being in abeyance, and we are actually entering into very uncharted waters, which obviously means that there are future challenges that one needs to look at: climate change, water stress, ecological fragility. All these, I think, demand fresh thinking, and perhaps, and this is the point I think which the book makes in the end, is a new framework. A new framework is required. The treaty, to my mind, um, has has the utility of the treaty is no more, which means that the treaty has been well utilized, and now we need a new framework. Now, whether that framework can come about bilaterally with Pakistan is something that we need to see. But that also would depend a lot on the political equation uh, with uh, with the two countries, right? So the message of trial by water, is that if you have to understand Indian-Pakistan relation, you must start with the rivers that were once shared and then divided. It's a source of survival. It's a source of conflict. And the entire Indus Basin tells us a story of rivalry. We've seen that, of resilience. We've seen that as well, the fact that the treaty has survived. And from time to time, in particular now, the reluctance to cooperate. So as we mark 65 years, and on September 19th, about a week from now, we will be marking 65 years of the Indus Waters Treaty, right? So there we are.
That's a lot of water under the bridge. So, I mean, you really want to look at it. But,
Uh,
one thing that came out clearly from your book, that I at least felt, was that despite the treaty clearly, from our perspective, favoring Pakistan, Islamabad seems to have succeeded in convincing the whole world that it was biased in against it. Now, is that just good PR, or is there some other elements? Or have we missed something?
Yes, I think when you read the book, and I'm very happy that you read the book, it's like reading between the lines to have picked that thing up. In India, there is this whole narrative, or genuine narrative, a genuine question that is being asked is whether the treaty was fair to India. Uh, on the other side, the Pakistanis have always argued that the treaty was unfair to them. So you have both the sides actually stating that the treaty has been unfair. So what has worked? I mean, this is an intriguing aspect of the treaty where both the parties have signed, and yet the party believes that it's been unfair. When you
Mhm.
study the book, I think our understanding of the treaty is largely political. There is a political narrative, and in that narrative, obviously, comes Pakistan. And we have a certain interpretation of what Pakistan is, given its nature. But there is also the technical understanding of the rivers and how it flows. The negotiation was done by engineers, and this is something that we forget. The entire negotiating process for 8 years, the nitty gritties of the negotiation, was done by the civil engineers. And these civil engineers were very much involved in the Punjab rivers, not so much on the western rivers, which were flowing from Kashmir. They were very much part of the entire partition process, and how Radcliffe had divided the line. So they're very engaged people, and they knew the hydrology very well. So they would probably be the only person who would actually negotiate the nitty gritty. For the engineers, the eastern rivers were very important, uh, Beas, Ravi, and the Satluj. And these rivers were feeding into the fertile grounds of East Punjab after partition. So there was about a 15 million hectare of land to be irrigated in East Punjab. Remember when the partition happened, West Punjab that went to Pakistan had much of the irrigated land because they had the canal systems which the British had built. When we had the partition, the headworks came to us, which was very important strategically that we got the headworks in Firozpur and the headwork in Madhavpur in Gurdaspur district. So these were very important for us. But we needed the water to irrigate the fields because The East Punjab fields were not very much irrigated during the time of the partition. So for us, the control, the exclusive right of the eastern rivers was very important. This is what also Pakistan wanted, the control of the eastern rivers, because they also had their Punjab and they had the canal system in which the water had to flow. So both actually fought for the eastern rivers. And in the end, our engineers prevailed and we had complete 100% exclusive right on the way we want to use the eastern rivers. Because A, we had to irrigate the field, as I said. B, we had the Bhakra Dam coming up, which was a huge project. We had to have the rights of the water to build this project. We also had a planned Rajasthan canal, which will take the waters from the eastern rivers to Rajasthan, the barren lands of Rajasthan, and Bikaner in particular. So these were of vital interest to India at that particular point of time. And the engineers made sure that the eastern rivers came completely to India. Now, when you're in a negotiation process, you cannot have everything. You have to get something and give something in return. And I think
Right.
here the Pakistani engineers were quite solid. Having lost the eastern rivers, they wanted to maximize their position in the negotiation, and for that they took a lot of money from India at that point of time. 63 million sterling pound India had to pay to Pakistan. Why? So that they could build the canals, the link canals from the western rivers to their eastern rivers. Because since we were in control of the eastern rivers and the waters, so they needed to bring the waters to the eastern rivers, their eastern rivers, and those could only be brought from the western rivers in Kashmir. So they had to build these canals. And India had to
Mhm.
pay for that. Now, there is an argument in the parliament that why did we give away so much of money, right? So, and also on the western rivers, I think while we gave away western rivers to Pakistan, complete use of western rivers the way they wanted to use, we also retained certain rights on the western rivers, which is sometimes overlooked in the current narrative. We said that India could build 3.6 million acre feet of storage capacity on the western rivers. That includes the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab. So you could build a total storage capacity of 3.6. You could also irrigate vast lands in Kashmir, and India had canal systems there. The Ranbir Canal and the Pratap canals, right, which were built eventually in the 50s and then expanded in the 60s, so that these waters could be channeled into the fields in Kashmir. India also had the right to build run of the river projects in Kashmir on the western rivers, as many as they could. In fact, the entire potential of hydroelectricity in Kashmir was about 15,000 megawatts. That was what it was determined. Now, the question is, having got all these provisions on the western rivers, what has India done? And I don't think we have done anything much on the western rivers, except in particularly this government has focused on the western rivers, because the eastern river story is over. We have done as much as we can on the western rivers. Our utilization of the eastern rivers is almost 90%, and we can't do anything more. We have some projects which is almost going to be finished. But it's the western rivers that matters today, because these are the rivers of Kashmir. Kashmir requires development. They require electricity. They require the water to be the water to reach the field. So that's where the focus is. So there was nothing really wrong in the treaty, and I don't think we gave away as it is made out to be. The narrative is that the western rivers carry a lot of water. The eastern rivers, in comparison, carry very less, almost one fourth less of what the western rivers carry. And therefore, this understanding that since the western rivers is going to Pakistan, therefore more water is going to Pakistan and less water is with India. It is not so much the volume of water that matters. It is how much you utilize the water that is essential. And the engineers thought that the eastern rivers in Punjab, which is a plain area, these are plain areas, you could actually utilize almost 100% of the water if you wanted to. So that's where our focus and attention was. On the western rivers, because of the mountainous terrain, your utilization is very limited because the geography is very difficult. So I think our engineers were clever. They were very insistent. They exactly knew the hydrology, and they understood that water at that point of time was critically important for Punjab. Today, water is critically important for Kashmir.
Mhm. It's interesting that you talked about utilizing the waters. Would you agree to some extent that the treaty, and by virtue of the fact that all the western rivers flow into Pakistan are almost uninterrupted, it
Yes.
made Pakistan in some ways complacent enough not to build storage and let a whole lot of water just seep out into the Arabian Sea? Is that a correct assessment to make, that they didn't build the necessary infrastructure?
No, I think they did. They realized that they needed to have their water structures in place, and that is precisely why the World Bank came into the picture. The World
Hmm.
Bank was ready to invest a lot of money, and they had donors who contributed to the World Bank kitty, the Indus Basin Fund, it was called, and they raised almost $900 million at that point of time. It was essentially to build these canals and storage and dams. Remember, prior to that, the entire Indus Basin never witnessed storage of water. The waters in the rivers would just flow right into the canal system, and then it will be channeled into the fields. Uh, but this time around, the whole exercise was to optimize the river water, to maximize its utility, extract as much as one can for the development, for irrigation, for hydroelectricity, for drinking water, for flood control, etc. So you were looking at a very different engineering interventions now, which was multifaceted. So it was going through a very a different phase, and I think the Pakistanis have done quite well to build up their storage capacities. They might constantly complain even today. They try to show that they don't have anything, but they've built their storage capacity. The Tarbela Dam, the Mangla Dam, all came post the treaty, right? And it was funded by the Indus Fund. Also, now the Chinese have come in and funding their various hydroelectricity project in the POK area. And after China, I think Pakistan is one of the countries that have relied on building dams and various structures. This is because they are very dependent on the Indus rivers that flows from India. They knew that very well, and therefore, to mitigate the dangers, they have built engineering structures all over the country. And probably now, with the treaty in abeyance, they're going around with a begging bowl again, saying that, look, India is going to stop the water, so I need to build my structures and store my waters when the dry season comes. So that's what they're going to do. So yes, I won't agree with this that Pakistan have not done anything. They have done a lot on building water reservoirs, barrages, structures, canal links, etc., etc.
Hmm. You know, Another thing that just struck me, I remember um, General Musharraf,
Yeah.
I think, when he had come to Agra, and I had also gone there, on the sidelines once mentioning that he had done a thesis at, I think, the Royal College or something in the UK,
Hmm.
which was on Kashmir, and where he argued that Kashmir was as much a strategic issue as it was a religious one, because
Yeah.
it controlled the headwaters. Now, is there any truth in that?
Yes, there is, and there's some mention of that in the book
Yes, I know.
about
I
his,
saw that too.
about his thesis in the UK, where he was doing a course.
Hmm.
But also this idea about the Kashmir and the rivers, and that if the western rivers have gone to Pakistan, therefore Kashmir is also part of Pakistan, was actually raised by Ayub Khan, and this had really, you know, it was a bolt to Nehru's entire conception of peace with Pakistan, or somewhere around about peace with Pakistan. Soon after the treaty was signed, Ayub was trying to claim Kashmir by saying this, the Western rivers is ours because the treaty
Right.
says so. Therefore, Kashmir is also ours. And poor Nehru remarks, that where are we with the treaty? I think we had thought that we would have peace, but I don't think that is going to ever come about with Ayub
Mhm.
making such claims. In fact, in the parliament, he says, we purchased peace. We purchased a treaty, we purchased peace. So he knew that he was entering into a very difficult equation with Pakistan. He never trusted Pakistan. But I think he wanted to reach out and establish some normalcy with Pakistan so that he could do other things that India was required to do. India's own development, India's own economic forward movement, its social issues. He didn't want India to get bogged down with Pakistan issues. So that's why he searched for a sort of a regularization of the water issues with Pakistan, so to put it. But it's Ayub. Ayub is the real sort of the mastermind behind linking the Western rivers to the Kashmir issue. And in 1963, he goes to America, and Kennedy invites him, and they have a chat, and that's the time, and it's written in the book that yeah. So he goes to the Oval Office, and Ayub lays down the maps. He shows 3 maps to Kennedy and his team, like a campaign general, and he talks about Pakistan's security concerns. And this is like, the treaty has been signed, it's done and dusted for him. Now he's looking at new areas where he could claim certain things. And he shows the first map, and it's about Indian troop deployment. So of the 1.5 roughly million soldiers, Indian soldiers, of that 15% faced China at that point of time, while about 85% were positioned against Pakistan. So this is showing to Kennedy, see, all these Indian soldiers are looking at us, and there is an intention that they will invade us. So he's trying to create this scare in the US administration. And then the second map he opens up, and that details that almost 80 to 85, 90,000 Afghan troops are on the western borders of Pakistan. So on the eastern borders, you have the Indian troops. On the western borders, you have the Afghan troops, right, who are armed with Soviet supplied equipment. And then the third map he opens up, and he shows the state of Pakistan's, what he describes as very vulnerable and thin defenses against both the neighbors, that is Afghanistan and India. And throughout, Ayub is insisting that without Kashmir, he uses that very popular phrase, a popular line. He says, without Kashmir, Pakistan would be up the gum tree. It's very unlike a Indian continent person to use this phrase. Pakistan would be up the gum tree. So it would be more American. It would be up the gum tree if attacked from India or Afghanistan. So,
Right.
Kennedy and his advisors quite looked at him, and of course they doubted, Ayub's entire picture of Afghanistan on the west and India on the east, and they considered it to be very alarmist. But he did manage to push into their head and mind that Kashmir was the litmus test of India and Pakistan peace. So once you had the treaty done, Kashmir still remained the litmus test, and that was ingrained in the US administration, and that continues to be so. From some angle or the other, you'll always hear voices suddenly emerging that's saying Kashmir, So I think Ayub set the ball rolling, linking rivers in Kashmir. And that was carried on subsequently by various other military leaders, including Musharraf. And I think his logic was also very simple, very much like the Ayub's mindset that if the Indus Treaty gave Pakistan rights on the western rivers, and those rivers are actually flowing from Kashmir, the adjoining territory should belong to Pakistan. So that sort of narrative continues in the Pakistan military mindset. Yeah.
Right. We're almost running out of time, but before I ask you to sort of gaze into the crystal ball and sort of tell us what is likely to happen later, I just remembered a quick phrase from your book where you said that Nehru was being magnanimous vis-a-vis the waters, vis-a-vis the Indus Water Treaty. He was being magnanimous, but he wasn't as magnanimous when it came to Kashmir. Now, that sort of struck me since you mentioned that whole thing. Now, could you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, probably have to relook at. Yeah, but there are bits about how he would look at Kashmir, despite the fact he created that what is described today as a great error of going in for a ceasefire line when India had made strategic gains in Kashmir. Despite that, I think he was far more nationalistic in his approach to Kashmir. He was far more strategic in his approach to Kashmir. He also understood that the British were playing a conniving game with Pakistan in Kashmir. He was fully aware of that. His relationship with Hari Singh and his relationship with Abdullah also is captured in the book, which also determined
Yes,
his own
I
position.
know.
Yeah,
Then it's
he
very
was. I
clear.
mean, of course, the CFL line tells a story, and there could be many other stories within that of why India sort of agreed to that ceasefire line and how India lost its strategic edge over Kashmir, which is also captured in the book and it's captured a
Yes, I
couple
know.
of times. But it also reminds me that in 1965, again, we had captured Hajipur Pass, which is again strategically very important. We gave it away in the
Give it
Tashkent
back.
Declaration.
Yes.
So you see, it only goes to prove that there are external pressures. There is an understanding of the situation and the circumstances in which a leader thinks and acts in a certain way. And it could be applied to Nehru at that particular point of time in Kashmir, and it could also be applied to Lal Bahadur Shastri when he signed the Tashkent Declaration, of course, the very next day he passed away. But the point I'm trying to make here is that circumstances and context determine actions, and there was clearly lots of pressure from the outside forces that were determining decisions. But I would also, and I have made this distinction that he was willing to give away water. Probably Nehru thought that water in any way needs to be shared because it is a river in his own understanding, and that probably if it can bring in an element of stability in the two countries' relationship, why not? He was willing to stick his neck out for that. And
Mhm.
the reason, as I had explained earlier, was that he was quite frustrated with the badgering of India's image that was going on. He was very conscious of that. And he also felt that this darkening of India's image was also spoiling India's relationship with the outside world because there was a wrong picture of India emerging. So he wanted to really settle that out. And I think, as I have captured in the earlier book and also is in this book, I think for the readers, the November 30th, 1960 debate in the Lok Sabha, I think is very important to read because
Oh, yes, I remember that. Mm.
it brings out everything. In
Yes.
fact, Nehru was called an umpire in Parliament over the Indus Waters Treaty. He was like an
Mhm.
umpire in a cricket match, not the Prime Minister of a country who was defending his interest, as someone said in the Parliament.
Yes. Yes.
He was more like an umpire trying to say, okay, thoda de do, thoda balance kar do, let's get it sorted out. So as I said, Nehru had a certain view of the world. Of course, that didn't agree with a lot of people. He didn't agree with the engineers, for example, in Punjab, India's Punjab. He didn't agree with a lot of parliamentarians at that point. Even his own party members were,
Right. Yes. I know.
yeah, quite
So,
quite annoyed and dismayed over Pandit's or his articulation of of the worldview and what he thought about it.
mhm. So, the last question, and we have run out of time. So, if you could
Yeah.
just keep it very crisp. Um, is it correct to say that the treaty cannot be sort of revoked? Number one. And number two, if that is indeed the case, what happens next?
Well, technically, you cannot exit the treaty because the treaty was designed in such a way, and I think the engineers knew that politically the two countries will never be at their best. They always knew that politically the two countries will be at their worst, and therefore it will affect the treaty. So they found a way out by saying there is no exit clause. You cannot leave the treaty, right? You cannot get out of the treaty. It binds you. It binds both the country like you're sort of locked into each other's intestine. That's how it was framed. But the treaty also gives you a little scope for what is called modification of certain. But modification also requires a right political climate between the two countries, where you can sit and discuss what needs to be changed or what needs to be added, right? So we have lost that now today. Post Pahalgam, these elements of the treaty is now lost. India has taken a unilateral position, which they have framed it as abeyance, which legally it means nothing. It only suggests that India has not abrogated the treaty. So the treaty
Mhm.
on paper remains. But both in terms of the text and in terms of the spirit, the treaty is washed down and probably gone into the Arabian Sea. Um,
Mhm.
does it need to be reframed, a new arrangement, a new structure? Uh, Possibly, we'll have to see how it works out. I think what will happen now would be more to do with information sharing about, for example, we just did by saying that for humanitarian reasons we are allowing the flood waters to and into Pakistan. I think also there will be a lot of back channel diplomacy from time to time, suggesting
Right.
that uh, you know, allow water to reach Pakistan. After all, they are poor people, poor farmers. So I think it will be very limited to transparency or information sharing, flood data sharing, etc. That's one level of it. The second level, I think, is, and this is probably there's a message in the book. I mean, there's no message. I'm not trying to give any message, but it comes down to this very important fact that on the Western rivers, India has not really optimized the provisions that was entitled. And they should now simply look at completing, if not 100% of that provisions, at least 70 to 75% of that provisions. In terms of building storage capacities, of course, we have to be very careful in choosing the sites where these storage capacities are going to be located, because these are difficult terrains, as I said. There are a lot of local voices that will emerge, right? Things have changed since 1950s. Now there's a lot of settlement around basin areas. So it's not easy to build projects. We see that in
Of
Arunachal
course.
Pradesh as well. There's seismic
Mhm.
activities that happen. So the terrains are rather shaky. All that needs to be calculated, and a proper scientific assessment has to be made as to what kind of projects needs to be in place. So we have to focus on that. We focus on the Western rivers, and I think at best an arrangement of sharing information and flood data to Pakistan should be made. I think that is all what is required in this water sharing arrangement with Pakistan. I think the treaty itself has lived beyond its utility, I think, or one can
Mhm.
say that its utility is over, really, because, as I said, Pakistan has built all the water structures. It has optimized the treaty. We haven't optimized the treaty, but we can do it unilaterally as we can,
Absolutely.
as we started to do so.
No. On that note, I'm sorry, but we have to bring this interview to a
Yeah.
close. Thank you so very much. And I look forward to having you again when we sort of start building up on what next.
Yes, most certainly. Thank you, Ramanand. That was very nice of you. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me over. All the best.
Thank you. That was Dr. Uttam Kumar Sinha, author of Trial by Water, Indus Basin and India-Pakistan Relations. One of the best books that I've read so far, and I heartily recommend that you pick up a copy. Talking to us about Indus Water Treaty, the past, present, the future, and what we expect down the line. I do hope you enjoyed this particular edition of The Gist, and I look forward to seeing you again. This is Ramananda Sengupta.